All right, let's get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. For the next 45 minutes, we'll be covering the topic, the top phishing threats to simulate in 2025. Little housekeeping to get us started. This webinar is being recorded. The recording and the slide deck will be shared with you later today. Please use the Q&A feature to post questions for James and I today. We might answer your questions directly in the chat or save them for the live Q&A at the end of this webinar. And if you still have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or to my colleagues at hoxhunt.com. So introductions are in order. My name is Elliot Baker. I am the Director of Content Marketing here at Hoxhunt. And joining us today is our resident expert on this topic, James Briscoe. Hello, James.
Hi, Elliot. Good to be here.
Well, it is great to have you here. So let's just do a quick covering of the agenda. First, we'll summarize how Hoxhunt is seeing AI accelerate certain types of phishing attacks and techniques. Then we'll walk through the different types of phishing techniques that Hoxhunt is seeing become popular. And finally, we'll explain actionable steps on how security leaders and admins can prepare their employees for these types of phishing attacks before answering some audience questions. Okay, so let's set the stage here. In the age of AI, we are being hit with more sophisticated phishing attacks and at a greater volume than ever before. Research by SlashNext has reported an over 4,000% rise in phishing attack volume since the advent of ChatGPT. Not all of those are getting through email filters, but some are. For instance, we saw an exponential rise in QR code phishing attacks this time last year. Because filters weren't catching them, more were getting through, and even though they didn't necessarily have a huge malicious click rate, there was still such a volume that it was a real problem. So it's a perfect example of how threat actors have leveled up their game and why we need to level up our training. And to do that, we have to be clued in on the latest phishing techniques. That's easier said than done in today's phishing landscape because it's advancing so much faster today with the advent of generative AI in both capabilities and adoption. You don't need to be a brilliant Bond villain to be a successful cybercriminal. Phishing as a service kits are available to anyone for very cheap on the dark web, and they can turn even a mouth breather into a millionaire cyber criminal. So that's a lot of preamble. James, take it away. What's actually going on in the threat landscape, and how do we protect our people?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Elliot. So, Gen AI, as I'm sure you know, learns through patterns and relationships in human-created content. Now, it then uses these patterns that it has learned to generate new content. So, this is how most people use it on a day-to-day basis, and it's a fantastic help in a lot of spheres of work and life. But when criminals trick or train their own malicious AI, they can constantly evolve their tactics and improve them through learning what patterns work and what don't. So this means that more than ever before, attackers can identify what emotions they can manipulate or what specific tactics or types of attacks work for the best results to tailor their attacks for individuals. And we're already seeing this happen. So, as you mentioned just before, since ChatGPT was launched, there has been a reported 4,151% increase in malicious emails. And this is because Gen AI not only makes writing the content of a malicious email easier, but also the malicious code. So, where it might have once taken an attacker a few hours to make a malicious email attack, it can now take just a few minutes to achieve similar results. So, let's take a look at some of those results. It's really quite astonishing to see just how easy and how much more personalized Gen AI is making attacks, especially when business email compromise cases in countries where English isn't the primary language are taken into consideration. So let's look at Japan, Korea, or the United Arab Emirates, for examples. These are places that traditionally used to be much tougher for attackers to target. Why? Well, this is because understanding the nuances of the language and also the culture made it challenging. So, even with basic machine translation tools, hackers didn't quite get the details right. Think about writing a specific email format that each of these cultures uses, or how the language can change dependent on the hierarchy within the business. These nuances made phishing attempts much easier and obvious to spot. But now with Gen AI, attackers can overcome these cultural barriers in minutes instead of spending hours, weeks, or even years researching. So this technology captures those little differences in language and style that used to trip attackers up, and it makes it much harder for us all to detect fakes.
So, with that in mind, let's talk about the top phishing techniques that we at Hoxhunt are seeing being used by these cyber criminals in this new age of generative AI. And I think we'll probably have to kick this off by talking about this year's top new threat, deepfakes. At every conference I've been to this year, and with most of the conversations I've had with security leaders and other arenas, we wound up talking about deepfakes, whether it's about deepfake audio or video, whether it's with some kind of a invoice being redirected through the CFO or the CEO. Everyone seems to have a story. And it's a perfect example of the democratization of black hat AI. And 3 years ago, this was pretty sophisticated stuff, but now you can get a free app to do it. So, what's it all about, James?
Yeah, well, let's start at the beginning. So, deepfakes are a type of digital media where an individual's likeness, like their face or their voice, is manipulated to create highly realistic but entirely fabricated videos or audio recordings. Scammers can use these deepfake assets in phishing campaigns to make them seem much more convincing. So, let's actually take a look at a few different examples, shall we? We'll start with a real case of a deepfake attack, and afterwards, a short audio deepfake simulation that we put together here at Hoxhunt. So, an attacker's purpose is to use your emotions against you, to bypass your logical thinking, and it can happen to anyone. The quote that you see on screen is a few years old now, and from a CEO of a large energy company. He received a deepfake phone call that sounded exactly like his boss, the CEO of the parent company. And his boss asked him to send €250,000 to a supplier. Thinking it was real, he sent the money right away. And in this case, the money was lost, but it shows how even a simple deepfake attack can have devastating results. And all you need is just that one small thing that pushes it over the line into a convincing attack. As you can see here in the quote on screen, the CEO actually mentions that it was the subtle German accent and the melody of his voice that really tipped him over the edge. And the manipulation was also made easier since this was a request from his boss, the CEO of the parent company. And when your boss asks you to perform a task, you feel a complex range of emotions due to their position in the hierarchy above you. So, because of this, you might not examine the request too closely and instead focusing on performing the task as quickly as possible, particularly if you weren't expecting a deep fake. Now, let's take a quick look at an example of a deepfake. So, this is a simulation that we put together here at Hoxhunt. In this scenario that we built, I have received a urgent meeting invite from Hoxhunt CTO, Budo Arvist. So naturally, I jumped straight on to see what he has to say.
Hey, great that you made it. Hey, sorry, but it seems my connection is again breaking up. I'll post this link to the chat. Okay, just a second. Here you go. If you can take a look. Thanks.
Ah, oh dear. Well, it seems like I was tricked. Some of you might be able to tell that that was a deep fake, but if you didn't know a deep fake was coming and you weren't listening carefully, it would have been much harder to catch. And for those of us who work at Hoxhunt, which I'm sure Elliot can attest to, that does sound a lot like Puru.
Oh, I can vouch. That sounds exactly like Puru. It's uncanny. Just like the example you shared earlier, just the melody, the subtle accent, it's almost a perfect replication.
Yeah, and that's something that we created in our team pretty quickly just from videos scraped from YouTube. So that was a few minutes work with a free tool. Some experts boldly predict that deepfakes will change the landscape of social engineering forever, eventually surpassing all other types of phishing attacks. At some point, deepfakes will get so good and so convincing, while simultaneously being so fast and cheap to produce, that they will surely become the primary attack method. Therefore, it's great to make sure your employees are aware of these types of attacks with security awareness training. At Hoxhunt, we offer deepfake training that consists of 3 different modules: a practical guide of how to respond to deepfakes and to recognize them, a real-life case study of an attack that almost succeeded, and an actual deepfake where we've cloned a person's voice and asked you to try and tell the difference. But in the training, there are 3 key points that we aim to reinforce as much as possible. So the first is to recognize when something's off. If something feels wrong or too urgent, take a moment to slow down and confirm your suspicions. This might be your brain noticing warning signs that you haven't fully realized yet. So in an organization or a company, each one of you has the power to make sensitive decisions, whether that's transferring funds, opening a locked door, or sharing a document. So if you think that you might be interacting with a deepfake, slow down and look at the request carefully. This will help protect you and probably frustrate the attacker who wants you to act quickly. The next key point of advice that we try to teach is that you should build personal connections to protect both yourself and your colleagues. And there's multiple different ways to do this. Getting to know your colleagues and your clients is incredibly effective in confirming their identities during calls, whether they're video or audio. So you can start with a light-hearted chat about shared hobbies, for instance, at the beginning of every call. This ritual will be a great way of being able to confirm whether or not the attacker has the correct information, or even if they know the ritual that you share together. Or you can agree on a unique passphrase before each call and exchange it at the onset of the call. These sorts of touches go a long, long way in confirming if someone is real. And attackers, again, who don't know about these sorts of connections and passphrases, will quickly reveal themselves. And then, thirdly, don't disclose personal information publicly. By quickly checking social media, an attacker can often find more than enough information to create a convincing attack. For example, by looking at your LinkedIn and your organization's page, they can guess who you might be working closely with and what type of responsibilities you might have. So we recommend that you don't disclose everything publicly, and maybe even lie about your location and activities on social media. If an attacker does detailed research, then this false information will expose them right away to your colleagues. So it doesn't actually stop there. At Hoxhunt, we can help you take your training a step further and even produce your own deepfakes like this one.
What I am today going to talk about is about using large language models, ChatGPT, in context of social engineering. What I'm today going to talk about is about using large language models, ChatGPT, in context of social engineering.
So it's pretty powerful, as you can see. And again, That was a clone of our CTO, Puru Arvist. And for those of you who are raring to know the right answer, the real Puru is actually number 2. But if you're looking to start testing your employees' abilities to spot deepfakes, Hoxhunt can even create multi-step deepfake attacks, like the one that you saw earlier, from a fake Microsoft Teams call where the target recipient gets a phishing email from their boss asking to jump on a call through a provided link. And in the call, the deepfake clone will invite employees to click on a perfectly safe and simulated Hoxhunt link rather than a phishing link. So, with all that said, let's move on to the next threat that we have to review for today. And that is QR code phishing, otherwise known as quishing. Quishing is the term used to describe cyber attacks where threat actors use malicious QR codes to deceive individuals and gain unauthorized access to sensitive information. So, this technique works on the assumption that users are less familiar with QR codes being used for malicious purposes, so they are more likely to scam them compared to clicking on a link, which is what most security awareness training focuses on. And at Hoxhunt, we saw a surge of these types of attacks in late 2023. So we wanted to find out just how susceptible users were to this trending attack vector at the time. So to do that, Hoxhunt ran a large study to measure the risk QR code phishing attacks posed to employees and whether or not they were tricked into scanning or clicking a malicious link. The study sent a QR code phishing simulation to nearly 600,000 employees across 125 countries from 38 organizations. And the control group had not been onboarded to Hoxhunt training yet, which mixes the QR code phishing simulations in there. So you can see that without this type of training, the results are quite poor, with only 2.5% of employees successfully reporting these simulations as suspicious. Meanwhile, 2.2% scanned the included QR code and 5.9% clicked on the email too. So the largest group didn't click or scan, but they also didn't report the email, meaning that they may not have correctly identified the email as suspicious. And in a real-world scenario, this also means that the threat continues to lurk in their inboxes. But let's take a look at users with Hoxhunt training. So when your security training program does prepare employees for these kinds of attacks with dedicated QR code phishing simulations, you see a significant risk reduction. In the group that had undergone Hoxhunt training, you can see that the success rate skyrockets to 56% correctly identifying and reporting the simulation. Only 1.2% actually scanned the QR code, and 2.8% clicked the malicious link, leaving only 40% who didn't scan or report the simulation, which is down from 89%. So when employees actually report simulations successfully, it gives you the confidence that they would report real threats too. So you can infer that your organization risk has lowered. This study shows that with the proper training, employees can be prepared to recognize and report these unique types of attacks, improving your security awareness training metrics and reducing your organization's risk. Now, let's move on to invoice fraud. This is a type of phishing attack where attackers will impersonate legitimate suppliers or vendors to trick organizations into paying fake invoices. Around 44.8% of all fraudulent payments are due to invoice and mandate scams. And this continues to trend upwards as more and more companies report an uptick in these types of attacks. So, to give you an idea of what a phishing invoice looks like in the wild, let's dive into get a better idea. On the left is an email from Norton, and on the right is the landing page once you click on the email. This is a pretty common attack, and there's a reason these are so popular. Norton software is widely used, making the company a convenient impersonation target. So, at a glance, the invoice looks real. But if you take a closer look, you'll spot some red flags that give it away as invoice fraud. So first, the invoice is pretty short notice. Electronic invoices tend to be sent well in advance of their due dates. The recipient is also addressed as customer and not by their actual name. And the chances of having such a simple invoice number, so you can see here it's just 1001, are pretty low, and the product name and pricing do not quite match what can be found on the company website. So, with that in mind, let's also take a look at the landing page. So, this can be a little more difficult to identify as malicious. This site is a legitimate QuickBooks payment page, which means it might actually get past some spam filters. However, there is one glaring anomaly, the merchant details. It has nothing to do with Norton, so always check to see whether it actually has anything to do with the service that you're receiving the invoice from. Even if Norton did use QuickBooks for billing, they would not use an unrelated domain to do so. And with that, it's important to make sure employees, especially those in finance, marketing, sales, and any other departments dealing with money, are familiar with these types of attacks, so they make sure to check these small details before issuing sums of money. Luckily, Hoxhunt has dozens of invoice fraud phishing simulation templates that will be customized depending on each employee's department and location. Now, let's take a look at spear phishing. Spear phishing attacks are personalized and tailored to individual victims, making them much more convincing and difficult to detect. So it's different from regular phishing in several ways. Instead of campaigns sent broadly to a large group of people, these attacks are highly targeted and specific. Instead of generic content, spear phishing attacks are personalized to the individual recipient. The cybercriminal will spend much more time researching and preparing these types of attacks compared to a phishing campaign that may even just be automated. They might cite specific details or trusted sources based on research to seem real. So, for instance, if they can see that you attended a certain conference, they might mention that conference, hoping to catch you off guard and also open up the conversation by suggesting that they met you there. And all of this extra effort culminates in a spearfish having higher success rates per email, but a lower number of overall successes versus regular phishing, which will have a lower success per email, but be able to reach more victims. So let's also ask, why smaller targets? Why would cybercriminals choose spearphishing if it takes more time? Well, being very particular about the target means hackers can choose someone who has access to sensitive information, the authority to make and approve transactions, and more frequent communication with external parties. These increase the chances of a larger payoff for the attackers, making these types of attacks more valuable and worth their time spent researching. So let's spot the difference. You can see the difference from phishing to spear phishing in these Hoxhunt simulation templates. On the left, you see a broad signature request phishing campaign. It uses a broad template that doesn't really mention anyone by name. But on the right, the random name variable will be filled with a colleague's name, maybe someone on the same team as the recipient. And it also has a placeholder for contract, which would have a personalized name related to a project that the recipient may work on. These small tricks can increase the difficulty of identifying malicious intent, but employees should be really trained on both as well. Now, let's move on to our next threat, smishing. Smishing is a form of phishing where attackers send fraudulent SMS messages to trick users into revealing sensitive information. This information could be things like personal details, passwords, or financial data, with the end goal being to either steal data or install malware on the user's device. These types of attacks can be scary for a couple of reasons. First, they've increased substantially, and second, organizations are behind on preparing these organizations for these attacks. In 2020, for instance, smishing attacks surged by 328%, and today, at least 17% of enterprise users have encountered phishing links on their mobile devices. Despite this, according to one Lloyd's TSB study, only 18% of participants could correctly identify fake emails and texts, and only 32% of organizations offer any sort of smishing simulations. So that's why, with Hoxhunt, employees can report suspicious SMS messages with the Hoxhunt iOS reporting app. If a simulation is reported, Hoxhunt sends a push notification to confirm stars earned and opens a micro-training about the SMS simulation, allowing them to learn more about the tricks used. And let's look at our last threat for today. So credential harvesting attacks are a popular attack method to steal user credentials and gain access to sensitive information, systems, or accounts. And Hoxhunt offers credential harvest training packages, including several email templates, simulated landing pages with form collection, and instant training feedback for those who click and/or provide their information. So this makes it easy to track each step that your employees may take wrong and can help build a better picture of the risk your organization faces and uncover opportunities to mitigate that risk. We've covered several different threats today, but I wanted to take a moment to highlight that we've really only scratched the surface of the types of phishing techniques that are out there. So we've also been seeing all of these types of attacks out in the wild, and while some are more successful than others, your organization's risk level really comes down to how your employees are trained to recognize and report these types of attacks. So let's start with a quick overview of service misuse, as it's increasingly common. This is when attackers exploit trusted platforms like PayPal to trick users into sharing sensitive information or making unauthorized payments by mimicking legitimate notifications or requests. And it extends to almost any type of platform. That can be HR or anything else that your business uses. And next, we always hear about seasonal attacks, but it's good to know that they can target any trending event, not just holidays. For instance, campaigns inspired by popular moments like Spotify Rap are a good thing to keep an eye out for. Impersonation attacks are a very broad category, but they also remain widespread. So this can target internal authorities in your organization, like HR or CEOs, to targeting trusted services that your company uses. Among these, examples include document sharing services, financial institutions, and even Microsoft impersonations are particularly prevalent. Lastly, you should also keep an eye out for voicemail phishing, as this is increasingly common, where attackers impersonate a service notifying you of a missed call and provide a link to listen to the message. So that's why it's important to make sure your employees get ready to practice recognizing all of these types of threats with consistent, frequent practice. Hoxhunt offers a comprehensive library of simulation templates that get automatically sent to your employees to ensure the ideal mix of content and difficulty. And Hoxhunt's AI engine generates a unique profile for every user and automatically delivers the most relevant simulations based on skill, language, department, and more. And these simulations are crafted by experts in over 32 languages and can be customized to fit your needs. So, with all of that, I'd like to hand back to you, Elliot, for any closing thoughts.
Well, first off, thank you, James. That was very comprehensive, very detailed, and very helpful for everybody in the audience, I'm sure. My closing thoughts are humans over thousands of years developed the instinct to interpret danger from their surroundings. And we don't really have thousands of years to develop those same instincts when we go online. And we are constantly confronted with various kinds of digital dangers. But using these types of approaches towards training, we can build that instinct that lets us recognize and report various sorts of threats as a matter of habit. These things are becoming to the point where we can no longer rely on the old tricks of the trade with just the old hover over the link, look for spelling and grammar mistakes. Of course, you need to do those things, but now you really need to get that sixth danger sense that says something's a little bit off. My CEO, it looks like him, sounds like him. Why is he telling me to suddenly redirect my payment to this North Korean bank today? It just seems like maybe not something he would normally do. So thank you very much. And with that, we are going to end the regularly scheduled programming for today. If you have any questions, we will answer them by connecting with you over email. So thank you all for joining. We appreciate it. Stay safe out there, enjoy your holidays, and we'll see you all in 2025.
Thank you.
As Chief Information Security Officer, I get paid to protect my company against cyber attacks. Okay, it's actually pretty cool. But it's getting harder, which is less cool. And those automated awareness programs, it's not helpful. They send like 4 generic phishing emails that most employees ignore.
Oh, hello there.
And when somebody actually clicks, they get forced into embarrassing training programs that feel more like a punishment. Meanwhile, cybercriminals are getting more sophisticated with personalized attacks that pick off my employees like sitting ducks.
Not again.
Especially Bob. So, I tried Hoxhunt. Hoxhunt goes beyond cybersecurity awareness and actually changes behavior, rewarding good clicks and coaching away the bad. Hoxhunt's adaptive learning model trains each employee based on their role, background, and skill level, so simulations feel like real-world attacks. If they fail a simulation, they get a quick training that's actually sort of fun. And when they spot an attack, they get positive reinforcement that locks in the behavior change. Whenever an employee suspects an email might be a scam, Hoxhunt will tell them instantly, providing a dopamine rush that gets your people to click, learn, and protect your company. Here's the magic part. Hoxhunt's adaptive model gets better with every threat reported across the Hoxhunt network, creating a network effect. With millions of people working together to build a human threat detection engine that's more powerful than any platform or process could ever be. Which means these days, the possibilities are endless.